All of the women in my family die at age 27. I turned 28 in 2 hours and 32 minutes. Desperate for more information about a mother I never really knew, he never had much to say. I'm convinced he was just drunk since the day she died. Every woman in her damn family, they die when they're 27, he'd sputter in between belches, his breath reeking of stale beer. I think the real curse is that my mom was the one to die, and not him. I wasn't fully convinced by the ramblings of a perpetually drunk man, but when I lost both of my sisters just months before their 28th birthday, I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Moira was found murdered, her face practically blasted off by a shooter while she was on a jog. Joy took her own life only days later. I was the one who found her, hanging in the bedroom of her apartment as I came to pick her up for Moira's funeral. She'd been there, swinging from the rafters, all night. It's hard to live a normal life when you know you have an expiration date, especially when it encompasses an entire year. I always dreaded my birthday, which from an early age became associated less with fun and birthday cake and more with worry and funeral caskets. But once Moira and Joy died, my next birthday, 25, was the most dreadful day of my life. 26 was worse, 27 unimaginable. This is it, I thought as I closed all of the blinds in my apartment, downing the last drop of vodka in the bottle. This is the last year of my life. 37 has been uneventful, to say the least. Why would I make any long-term plans, forge any meaningful relationships when I know they simply cannot last? The worst part of this last year has been simply not knowing when my impending death is coming. It could have been any day within the last 364. It could be within the next minute. I must admit I became something of a recluse, my windows always shuttered, additional locks installed in my door, letting the phone ring through to voicemail, hiding under my covers with the lights out whenever I got a knock on my door. I stocked up on preserved foods and various goods that I would need to last the year. I was so paranoid that I even covered my mail slot, stuffed a towel in the space beneath my front door. I didn't want anything getting through from the outside world, God forbid, an anthrax letter. Falling off the face of the earth didn't matter much, anyway. I didn't have friends or family anymore. My mother and both of my sisters were dead, and my dad disowned me when I came out as a lesbian after my sisters died. I moved away and severed contact soon after. The night before my 27th birthday, I started getting these strange phone calls from a blocked number. I've always had anxiety about phone calls, so I just let it ring. The number kept calling, at least once per day throughout the past year. Then the knocking started, once a week at first, but it's only been getting worse, more frequent, and the pounding on my door more frantic each time. Convinced it had something to do with my inevitable death, I've been driven mad by the unknown visitor, especially over the past week. I got ready for bed last night, knowing that tomorrow, today, now, is the day I will turn 28. My time had run out, and I searched for comfort in a bottle of liquor. I didn't find it. I fell into bed, drunk and delirious, and prayed the morning wouldn't come, though I knew it would. I eventually got to sleep, but it was restless and unsatisfying. The kind of sleep where you feel like you have one eye open, always watching. That's why I was quick to wake when the door to my bedroom creaked open early in the morning, before the first sign of light. I shot up in my bed, glancing around my room in a frenzied panic, at first seeing nothing out of the ordinary other than the door, pushed slightly ajar. A closer look revealed something I'd missed, something that sent my heart racing, froze me to my core. Two dark figures stood in the empty space behind the half-open door, unmoving, almost like a pair of statues, waiting, watching, wordless. "Leave me. Leave me alone," I squeaked, unable to move, paralyzed in the power of their presence. The shadowy figures instead shuffled out from behind the door, creeping slowly towards me in the dark. I knew this would certainly be the end of my life, the fulfillment of my curse, if I didn't act. Suddenly recalling the self-defense methods I drilled into my mind, I flipped my bedside lamp on to stun the intruders and reached underneath the table to pull the knife I'd duct-taped there a year ago, a 27th birthday gift to myself. As soon as the light flooded the room, though, I knew the blade would be of no use. My intruders were not a pair of assassins, not human ones, at least. In the yellow light of the lamp I discerned the identities of the dark figures. They were my sisters. Joy stood at the foot of my bed, pale, in that same conservative black dress I'd found her dead in years ago. The one she'd picked out for Moira's funeral. Her head hung parallel to her shoulders, neck grotesquely bent from her hanging. Moira was a few steps behind her. I could only assume it was her, considering the severity of her injuries. She'd suffered a gunshot wound to the head, so brutal that we were not allowed to see her after her death, so intense that it had entirely disfigured her face. The lower half of her face had been reduced to a pit of gore, her jawbone barely attached on one side, her mouth mangled, with only several teeth remaining studded randomly throughout the mess. "Why are you here?" I cried, gathering my knees to my chest and holding them tight. Are you here to take me?" Joy made a feeble attempt to shake her head, the side of her face only brushing weakly against her shoulder. She waited several moments before putting one of her feet in front of the other, moving towards the side of my bed. As I recoiled instinctively, she slowed her pace. Moira trailed after her until they were both beside me. I whimpered as Joy leaned over me, her head flopping forward suddenly with emotion, neck cracking sickeningly. With her lips brushing against my ear, she whispered, She tried. Her speech was labored and wheezing, as if her vocal cords had nearly been shredded. "What do you mean, Joy?" I pleaded. Her lips moved against my ear once more, but no sounds came out despite a clear strenuous effort. Moira wagered and attempted answering my query, but only succeeded in sputtering blood from the gaping wound in her face, ejecting one of her remaining teeth onto the floor as her jawbone swung precariously, barely hanging on. She raised one hand, slowly curling it into a fist before striking her knuckles furiously against my bedpost, the incessant sound startling me. I forced my eyes shut tight and pulled my knees even closer against my chest. Moira's knocking seemed only to escalate in volume, seemed to go on forever, finally, it stopped. I cracked my eyes open to find that both of my sisters had vanished, that the light of early morning had begun to spill in through the slats of my blinds. It was just past 6 o'clock, the 7th of June, the day of my 28th birthday. I was born at 9:26 a.m. Once I learned of the curse, I burned the time of my ultimate expiration into my mind. I only had 3 hours and 16 minutes left to live, if I even had that long. Draping my covers over my head, I resolved to spend the rest of my life asleep. I figured I'd rather pass peacefully in my sleep like my mother did than to suffer a fate similar to my sister's. My plans were interrupted, however, by that damned knocking on the door. The interruption usually didn't come so early in the morning. I decided initially to ignore the strange visitor but pulled the blankets back down soon after as a certain sense of familiarity struck me. The pounding on the door reminded me all too much of Moira's knocking just moments before. It easily could have been a trick of the curse, but something compelled me to approach the door. "What do you want?" I called from behind the barrier, clinging to the relative safety it provided. The reply came from an unfamiliar man's voice. "I just have a letter for you, miss, just slide it under the door, and please leave," I returned, using my bare foot to remove the towel I used to block the small space beneath it. He deposited a bright yellow envelope under the door as I requested. I waited quietly for the sounds of receding footsteps before sliding on a pair of gloves to handle the letter. It was addressed to me, simply by first name and with no address. Carefully, I unsealed the envelope to reveal a birthday card. I hadn't received one in years. Bright, sparkling letters on the front formed the words, "Daughter, you're 27. I scoffed at the sick joke. I hadn't received a birthday card since I was a child, and my dad couldn't even get my birthday right. I didn't think he even knew my address. I cracked it open gingerly to read the message inside. "Laura. If you're reading this, your father has killed me. Don't believe a thing he or the police say. I was not the target of a random attack. I did not die of natural causes, and I certainly did not off myself. I would never leave you if I had the choice. The truth is, I died is because I found the truth behind my family's curse and foolishly told your father. He was in on it the whole time, planted in my life by some secret society to eradicate me, to eradicate us. What we have is not a curse, it is a gift of immense power. The power to heal, but the power to harm just the same. We come into our power at the age of 28, a number associated with independence, leadership, and self-sufficiency. An age where we can handle the responsibility such a power inevitably comes with. It's a strong number, and you will come into great strength, though you've always been a strong girl. I hope you've made it this far, but at the same time I know you have. You were always a feisty little girl for the 4 years I had the pleasure of knowing you, of loving you. You never let anyone tell you what to think or do, especially not your father. Happy birthday, I love you. Mom. I closed the card softly, thinking on the strained words of my sister. Mom had tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. The pieces of the puzzle slid into place. My dad must have murdered Moira, and Joy ended her own life out of grief and a belief that she would inevitably be next. At the time of writing this, I only have 2 hours and 32 minutes until I officially turn 28. Over the past hour or so, I've already begun to feel the power flowing into my body, electrifying as it runs through my veins. I will the towel to reposition itself under the door, and it does so, sliding across the floor on its own. I need to keep myself safe until 9:26, after all. I'm planning on surprising my father with a visit, for my birthday. All of the women in my family die at age 27. I turned 28 a week ago. Last Sunday, I turned 28. I suppose that sounds pretty uneventful on its own, but I'd grown up my whole life believing that I was cursed to die at 27 like the rest of the women in my family. It turns out that the curse was just a way to cover up the truth, that at 28, I would develop extraordinary powers. My father had killed my mother, and at least one of my sisters. Now, I was planning on leaving my story there. But I guess I underestimated just how hungry y'all are for a revenge tale. I wish I could say that what I'm about to tell you is just that, a simple tale of revenge, perfectly executed, a gaping generational wound neatly closed with a few stitches. Having been lied to all of my life, I value honesty. I'm not going to lie to you. If that's what you are looking for, I suggest you stop reading now, because an entirely new source of terror has come to light. After I read my birthday card last Sunday, I waited anxiously for the clock to hit 9:26. I'd been feeling the power start to trickle into me early in the morning, but once the second hand made its full lap around to move the minute hand to the tick just after the 5, a jolt of energy passed through my body. It was almost painful, like how I imagined being struck by lightning might feel, but at the same time, it felt good. I felt important, powerful, strong. So strong that it even scared me. As I eagerly accepted the full extent of my powers, I found myself in what I can only describe as a vision. An alternate setting that materialized all around me at once. Logically, I knew that I was still in my living room with my feet planted on the familiar wood flooring, but the ground beneath me felt rough, uneven, gritty. I glanced down to find myself standing upon a shelf of sandy rock, just steps from the edge of some great cliff. Fear rendered me mute at the top of that cliff, and I swear I could feel the wind whipping all around me, hear the waves crashing furiously below, feel the briny ocean water misting my face. I leaned forward, peering precariously over the edge at the churning sea and its infinite black and white froth. I found its movement, back and forth, push and pull, comforting in its predictability, until it seemed as if something shifted to upset the flow, something unseen but its effects impossible to deny. There was something down there, something huge enough to alter the tides, yet hidden beneath the waves. More horrifying still was the palpable feeling that something wanted me to jump, to dive headfirst into the dark sea below. I felt a presence beneath the waters, something ancient, unseen, vastly more powerful than I could ever hope to be. And whatever it was, it wanted me to jump. But it didn't have to force me, it had all the time in the world, and it could wait. The vision fell apart as quickly as it had materialized, my comfortable reality reconstructing itself anew in mere seconds. I frantically shook my head to oust the troubling image, to rid myself of the powerful draw it had had on me. I had a job to do, but first, I had to figure out exactly what I could do. Simply by willing it to happen with my mind, but I was startled by the sudden ease of it. Focusing on a glass of water on the table, I attempted to move it just slightly to the left, but it instead flew off the surface, shattering as it hit the wall. I rushed to clean up the mess, plucking shards of glass from the carpet, groaning at the wet spot. To my surprise, once I glanced down at the dampened carpet, droplets of liquid started to rise from the floor until the spot had vanished, the condensation suspended in mid-air. It's hard to explain, but I just moved it, until I finally released to deposit the water in the sink. Before you say anything, I know. It was stupid to test this out on something so fragile. But my powers didn't exactly come with an instruction pamphlet. A dull ache grew in my heart as I realized I should have been learning this with my mother, and I longed for her more than I had in years. Like a young child desperately reaching up with outstretched arms, I wanted my mommy. I couldn't help but think of the fear I felt the first time I got my period. It sounds silly, but I was bleeding and I thought I was dying, simply because I didn't have my mom there to explain it to me. And my dad couldn't be bothered to parent his child. My dad the thought of him came with an overwhelming rage. With my senses alive in a way they'd never been before, I felt every cell in my body teeming with kinetic energy until the light bulb in the lamp beside me burst. I hesitated as I pondered the vision, but none of that was important just then. It was time I paid my old man a visit. Though he could never repay me for the losses I'd endured, I intended to collect the one thing that would come close, his miserable life. I started for my room to pack a small bag, but before I knew what had happened, I'd slammed headfirst into my bedroom door. "Shit," I muttered, rubbing a palm over what would certainly be a bruise forming across my forehead. I figured then that I could move much faster now, that I'd have to be careful.